He grabbed her by the arm so hard the clipboard hit the floor. Dr. Harrison Cole, chief of trauma surgery at St. Mercy's Hospital, leaned into the face of a quiet nurse named Maya Carter and said 4 words that silenced every person in that emergency bay. "Get her out now." But Maya didn't move. She didn't flinch. And what happened in the next 60 seconds would bring an entire hospital to its knees and change everything about who gets to save a life. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning because you need to know who Maya Carter really was before that room found out. Maya Carter arrived at St. Mercy's Hospital at 4:47 in the morning. Not because her shift started at 5, not because she lived close. She arrived early because she had learned a long time ago in a place very far from Chicago that the minutes before chaos are the only minutes you truly control. She walked through the staff entrance the way she always did, quietly, deliberately, without looking for acknowledgement from anyone. She hung her bag in her locker, tied her hair back in one smooth motion, and laced up her shoes the way a soldier laces boots. Not decorative, functional, ready. The night shift nurses looked up when she came in, and a few of them nodded. That was enough for Maya. She didn't need more than a nod. She'd spent enough years in places where people communicated entire plans without a single word, where a look between 2 people could mean the difference between a mission completed and a body brought home. She poured herself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and stood at the window of the break room for exactly 90 seconds. She did this every morning. She was looking at nothing in particular. Or maybe she was looking at everything. That was the thing about Maya Carter. It was impossible to tell whether she was resting or calculating. Her colleague Darnell, a big soft-spoken trauma nurse who had worked the floor with her for 3 years, came in behind her and dropped into a chair with the exhaustion of a man who had been on his feet for 12 straight hours. "Anything I should know about?" Maya asked without turning around. "Quiet night," Darnell said, "which means today's going to be ugly." She turned and looked at him. He shrugged. "It's always ugly after a quiet night." Maya almost smiled. Almost. She set down her coffee cup, straightened her badge, and said, "Go home, Darnell. Sleep." "You first," he said. She was already walking out the door. The trauma bay at St. Mercy's was a controlled kind of organized chaos, even on slow mornings. Monitors beeped in staggered rhythms. Nurses moved between stations with the economy of people who had learned not to waste a single step, and the overhead lights hummed that particular frequency that Maya had long since stopped noticing. She had spent so many hours under lights like these in different rooms, in different countries, under different circumstances, that the hum had become as natural to her as breathing. She checked her stations. She verified her equipment. She confirmed that the crash cart had been restocked from the night before because she had learned never to assume someone else had already done the important things. Then she pulled up the board and read through the overnight notes with the focused, efficient attention of someone reading intelligence reports. Nothing looked unusual. A 62-year-old with a hip fracture from a fall, a 30-year-old with appendicitis waiting for a surgical slot, a teenager brought in for a broken wrist after a skateboarding accident. And then the radio crackled. "St. Mercy's, this is Rescue 14. We are inbound with a critical trauma patient male, late 30s, highway collision, multi-vehicle, suspected tension, pneumothorax, BP, dropping, ET, A4 minutes." The word that cut through everything else in that sentence was tension, pneumothorax. Maya set down her clipboard without rushing. But something in her shifted, not fear, not anxiety, something more like the quiet, precise activation of a mental system that had been trained for exactly this. She began moving to the bay before the charge nurse had finished relaying the call, and the other nurses on the floor noticed the way they always noticed when Maya moved with intention. "Carter," said the charge nurse, Lydia Parsons, a sharp, competent woman in her late 40s who ran the trauma floor the way a captain runs a ship. "Your primary nurse on incoming trauma." "Already there," Maya said. The ambulance arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The paramedics pushed through the bay doors with the controlled urgency that separates trained emergency responders from everyone else, fast but not panicked. The patient was a man named, as Maya would later learn, Daniel Reeves. He was 39 years old. He had a wife named Caroline, who was at that moment driving through pre-dawn traffic toward the hospital, having received the call no spouse ever prepares for. He had 2 daughters aged 8 and 11 who were still asleep in their beds, not yet knowing that their father's life was in the hands of strangers. Maya didn't know any of this yet. What she knew was what her eyes in training told her. In the first 10 seconds of looking at Daniel Reeves, his color was wrong. His chest movement was asymmetrical, and the oxygen reading on the paramedic's portable monitor was falling faster than the reported blood pressure alone could explain. "What did you give him on scene?" she asked the lead paramedic as they transferred Daniel to the trauma table. 2-liter saline supplemental. O2 at 15 liters, attempted needle decompression right side, didn't get the return we expected. Maya filed that away. She noted it with the same careful precision with which she noted everything. And then Dr. Harrison Cole walked in. He walked in the way certain men walk into rooms they have decided belong to them, with a stride that expected the space to rearrange itself around him. Harrison Cole was 54 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and had been the senior trauma surgeon at St. Mercy's for 11 years. In those 11 years, he had performed thousands of procedures. He had saved lives that other surgeons had declared unsalvageable. He had a wall in his office covered in commendations and a reputation in the department that functioned like a gravitational field. Everything and everyone in his orbit adjusted their trajectory to accommodate his. He also had a voice like a courtroom verdict. When Harrison Cole spoke in a trauma bay, the room listened, not because they were asked to, because the alternative, not listening, had consequences that most people at St. Mercy's had decided weren't worth testing. He snapped on his gloves as he approached the table, scanning the monitors with a sweep of his eyes that was whatever else might be said about the man genuinely expert. He had assessed the situation in 3 seconds. Maya could see that. She recognized the particular quality of attention that belonged to someone trained at a very high level, because she had seen it before in commanders and field surgeons, in people whose minds operated in emergencies, the way other people's minds operated only when they had time to think. "Tension pneumo right side," Cole said immediately. "Probable hemothorax developing. We're going chest tube right now. Clear the field." "Blood pressure is 64/41, one of the residents called out. "I heard the number," Cole said without turning. "Prep the tube." Maya was already on the left side of Daniel's body watching his chest. Not the monitors, his chest. Because monitors report data, the body tells truth. His left side moved differently from his right. Fractionally. Not enough for someone scanning a room to catch, but enough for someone standing exactly where Maya was standing, with the specific history of observation that Maya carried in her muscles and her memory to flag it. She looked at the oxygen saturation reading. 81% and still declining despite supplemental oxygen. That was a number that shouldn't be declining that fast on that intervention. It meant something wasn't being addressed. "Dr. Cole," she said, her voice was calm, measured. She had been trained to communicate clearly under circumstances that would have reduced most people to silence. "I'm seeing asymmetrical chest movement on the left side. Oxygen saturation is not responding at the rate it should. I want to flag a possible left-sided component." Cole didn't stop what he was doing. "We're treating the right side. Paramedics attempted decompression. We continue protocol." "The paramedic reported incomplete return on the right side decompression," Maya said. "If there's also a developing tension component on the left, nurse." The word landed like a gavel. Cole looked up from his work for exactly 1 second, and in that second, his eyes communicated with perfect clarity that he considered this conversation over. "I appreciate the input. I don't need it. Stay in your lane." The other residents didn't look at Maya. They looked at the floor, at the monitors, at their instruments, anywhere that wasn't the intersection between the senior surgeon and the trauma nurse who had just spoken a second time after being dismissed once. Lydia Parsons, standing at the edge of the bay, gave Maya a look that said, "Not now." Maya read it. She stood still. She watched. Cole began the chest tube procedure on the right side with the speed and precision of a man who had done this hundreds of times. He was good. Maya acknowledged that fact privately, without resentment and without softening it. He was technically excellent. That was real, and it mattered, and it did not change what she was seeing. Daniel's oxygen saturation hit 78%. Cole continued working. 76%. "Pressure's dropping further," a resident said quietly, "or to 8/22. "I know," Cole said. His jaw was set. He was focused. He believed in what he was doing. That was the thing Maya understood standing on the other side of that table. He wasn't being careless. He was being confident. And in medicine, the distance between confidence and catastrophic error is sometimes only as wide as one overlooked data point. Maya looked at Daniel's left chest wall again. Then she looked at the vein in his neck distended, visible even from where she stood. She looked at his trachea. She looked at the position of the midline. And she knew. Not guessed, not suspected. Knew. With the particular cold, unshakable certainty that comes from having been in the specific circumstances that teach this lesson, the kind of certainty that lives not in the thinking part of the brain, but in something older and deeper and faster than thought. She spoke again, her third time. Dr. Cole. Her voice was still even, but something in the quality of it had changed a kind of bedrock stillness that if you knew how to listen told you that the person speaking had moved beyond politeness into something closer to necessity. I need you to look at the trachea. I need you to look at the neck veins. I believe we have a left-sided tension pneumothorax developing simultaneously, and if we don't address it in the next 90 seconds, he didn't let her finish. Pull her out of this bay. The words hit the room like something physical. Pull her out of this bay. No one moved. Residents stood frozen. The other nurses looked at each other without moving their heads, just their eyes, the private language of people who are calculating risk in real time. Lydia Parsons took one step forward and then stopped. Cole didn't look up from his procedure. His voice was absolutely controlled, which was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. I said, pull her out. She is disrupting a critical procedure with unqualified speculation. Get her out of this bay and get me someone who can hold a position without editorializing. Maya Carter did not move. She stood exactly where she was. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was composed with a stillness so total, so unreadable, that several people in that room would later describe it as the most unnerving thing they had ever witnessed. Not because she looked angry, not because she looked defiant, but because she looked like someone who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the world to catch up to it. Seconds passed. The monitor screamed. Daniel Reeves's oxygen saturation dropped to 69%, and the room understood in the space of a single collective heartbeat that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. Cole's hands stilled over the procedure. For the first time since he had entered the bay, his eyes moved not to the monitors, but to Maya Carter. And in that moment, something passed between them that no one else in the room could fully describe afterward, though all of them would try. It was the moment a very confident man looked at a very still woman and felt for the first time a splinter of genuine uncertainty. What are you seeing? He said. It was the quietest he had spoken since entering the room. Maya was already moving. She reached for the needle decompression kit on the left side of the cart, the side that hadn't been touched with the efficiency of someone whose hands knew where things were without needing to look. Her movements weren't frantic. They weren't theatrical. They were the movements of a person performing at a task they had done before, under worse conditions, with more at stake, with less equipment, with no backup in the dark. I need you to hold position, she said to the resident nearest to her. Her voice was so calm it almost didn't belong in that room. Exactly where you are. Don't move the patient. You don't have authorization to, the resident started. I know, Maya said, and she did it anyway. The needle went in on the left side of Daniel Reeves's chest at the second intercostal space mid-clavicular line, with a precision so exact that the rush of air that followed was immediate. A sharp, audible release that seemed to decompress not just the patient's chest, but the entire room. The oxygen saturation stopped falling. 69, 71, 74, 78. Climbing. The blood pressure display ticked upward with it. 62/30, 70/40. The numbers moving in the direction that numbers in a trauma bay were supposed to move. Daniel Reeves took a breath that his body had been fighting for, and the room went absolutely, completely, devastatingly silent. Harrison Cole stood on the other side of the table with his gloved hands held slightly out from his sides, in the posture of a man who has just been shown something he did not anticipate by someone he had ordered removed from the room. He said nothing. No one said anything. Maya withdrew the needle with the same careful precision. She checked the saturation readout. She checked the patient's color. She looked at the neck veins no longer distended. She looked at the trachea midline restored. She looked at Daniel Reeves's chest rising and falling now, with the bilateral symmetry of a body that had what it needed. Then she stepped back from the table, set the instrument down without a sound, and waited. Because she had been here before too, not in this exact hospital, not in these exact clothes, but in this exact moment. The moment after, the moment when the dust settles and the world has to reckon with what just happened and who made it happen and why no one listened and what that means and what comes next. She had been here before, and she knew that what came next was never simple. The silence in that trauma bay lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds that felt like standing at the edge of something enormous looking down. Then Dr. Harrison Cole pulled off one glove with a sharp snap, and the sound broke everything open. "Someone get me the attending supervisor," he said. His voice was controlled in the way that pressure is controlled, not calm, but contained. The difference was important. Calm was the absence of something. This was the presence of something being held back by sheer force of will. Nobody moved immediately. That was the first tell. In Harrison Cole's trauma bay, when he spoke, people moved. The fact that 3 residents and 2 nurses stood exactly where they were for the span of a breath told Maya everything she needed to know about what had just shifted in that room. Authority she had learned a long time ago is only as real as the moment it is obeyed. The moment people hesitate, even for a second, the architecture of power starts showing its cracks. Lydia Parsons was the one who finally moved, not toward a phone, toward Maya. "Carter," she said quietly, "step out with me." "The patient needs continuous monitoring," Maya said. She wasn't being difficult. She was being accurate. Daniel Reeves was stable, more stable than he had been 60 seconds ago. But tension pneumothorax had a way of lying to you, of appearing resolved and then reasserting itself with no warning, and she was not willing to walk away from him based on a preliminary readout. "I'll take over monitoring," said one of the residents, a young woman named Dr. Priya Anand, second year, who had been standing at the foot of the table since the ambulance arrived and who had not taken her eyes off Maya since the needle went in. There was something in her face that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite fear. It was the expression of someone whose understanding of something has just been permanently revised. Maya looked at Priya for a moment, assessed her, then nodded once. She followed Lydia out. The corridor outside the trauma bay felt like a different world, quieter. The overhead lights were the same, the floor was the same, but the pressure was different, the way pressure changes when you walk out of a burning building and suddenly remember what air is supposed to feel like. Maya walked with her hands loose at her sides and her breathing even, and if anyone watching her had not seen what she just did, they would have thought she was returning from a routine check. Lydia pulled her to the side near the supply alcove and dropped her voice to something that was half professional and half human. "Tell me what you saw," Lydia said. "Not for a report, for me, right now." Bilateral presentation, Maya said. The right side decompression was real and necessary, but the left side was developing simultaneously. The tracheal shift wasn't visible from where Cole was standing. The neck vein distension was there if you were looking for it, and the saturation drop, inconsistent with a unilateral presentation. The numbers told the story if you read them against each other instead of in isolation. Lydia was quiet for a moment. She was a woman who had spent 22 years in emergency nursing, and she processed information the way experienced people process it, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of deep interior pressure, like tectonic plates shifting. When she spoke again, her voice was careful. "Cole is going to file on you, Maya. I know. Unauthorized intervention, insubordination. He's going to use every word in the book. I know that too. And you did it anyway." Maya looked at her evenly. The patient had 90 seconds, maybe less. Lydia held her gaze. Something moved through her expression, not quite pride, not quite grief, but something that lived in the territory between them. "I know," she said finally. "I know you were right. That doesn't mean this is going to be easy." "It was never going to be easy," Maya said. "That's not why I'm here." Before Lydia could respond, the door to the trauma bay opened and Dr. Priya Anand stepped into the corridor, her eyes going directly to Maya with an urgency that overrode the presence of the charge nurse entirely. "Saturation's holding at 92, Priya said quickly. BP 78/50 and climbing. He's responding." She paused. Then with the careful precision of someone choosing words deliberately, "Dr. Cole wants you back in the bay." Maya and Lydia looked at each other. "Cole," Lydia said slowly, "wants Maya back in the bay." "Yes," Priya said, and then barely above a whisper, "He didn't say it like that, though. He said, and I quote, 'Get me the nurse who performed the decompression. I want her at bedside for the rest of this case.'" The 3 women stood in that corridor, and the weight of those words settled over all of them differently. For Lydia, it was something like relief mixed with wariness, the recognition that a crisis had been partially contained, but was far from over. For Priya, it was the look of someone who had just watched a tectonic shift happen in real time and was still calibrating what the new landscape meant. For Maya, it was something quieter and more private, a recognition she kept entirely behind her eyes where it belonged. She walked back through the door. Cole was standing at the head of the table, and the dynamic of the room was different now, in a way that everyone could feel but no one could have articulated precisely. The residents were still at their stations. The nurses were still monitoring. But the quality of the attention in the room had changed. People were watching differently, listening differently. The invisible hierarchy that structures a trauma-based surgeon at the apex, everyone else arranged in descending order beneath, had developed a fracture line that everyone was trying not to look at directly, the way you don't look directly at something bright without wanting to. Cole did not look at Maya when she entered. He looked at the monitors. Chest tube is in on the right, he said. Drainage established. The left side needle decompression is holding. We need to get him to CT for a full chest assessment before we decide on surgical intervention. Agreed, Maya said. A beat of silence. Cole's jaw moved. He was not a man accustomed to the word agreed being offered to him as an equal exchange. In his world, people either followed his direction or argued with his direction. The idea of being agreed with by a nurse, particularly this nurse at this moment, landed somewhere in his chest that he had not prepared for. Your read on the tracheal shift, he said, still not looking at her. Walk me through it. It was not technically an apology. It was not an admission. Harrison Cole was not wired for either of those things in a room full of people. But it was something. It was a man who had just ordered a woman removed from his operating space, turning around and asking her to teach him something. And every person in that room understood exactly what that meant, even if no one would have dared to say it out loud. Maya walked him through it, clinically, without triumph, without bitterness, without the softening that sometimes accompanies difficult truths when the person receiving them is powerful and fragile in equal measure. She told him what she saw and how she saw it and what it meant, and he listened with the particular rigidity of someone listening while simultaneously managing the experience of being wrong in public. When she finished, the room was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet this time. Get him to CT, Cole said. His voice was not warm, but it was level. Carter, you're with the transport team. She nodded. She didn't say thank you. He hadn't thanked her. They were in that moment. Two people who had arrived at a functional truth through the worst possible route, and the most honest thing either of them could do was simply continue doing their jobs. But the story didn't stay inside those walls. It never does. By the time Daniel Reeves was in the CT scanner, word had moved through the department with the speed that only hospital rumors achieve. Not spread by gossip exactly, but by the 1,000 tiny signals that people in close quarters transmit without intending to. A look between nurses at the station, a resident who came out of the trauma bay and stood at the coffee machine for 4 minutes without actually getting coffee. The fact that Lydia Parsons had her office door closed, which she almost never did. People knew something had happened in Bay 3. They didn't know what exactly, but they felt the shape of it. Hospitals have their own kind of atmosphere, a barometric pressure that shifts when something significant has occurred, and the nurses and techs and orderlies and administrative staff who had spent years working those floors had all developed a sensitivity to that pressure, the way farmers develop a sensitivity to weather. In the break room, two nurses were speaking in low voices when Maya walked in to get a glass of water. Heard Cole ordered her out of the bay. Heard she did a needle decompression without authorization. Heard the patient would have died. They stopped when Maya came through the door. She looked at them without expression, filled her glass, drank it, set it down, and left. She had long since learned that being the subject of other people's conversations was not something she could control. What she could control was what she said and did inside those conversations when she was actually present. What she could not control and what she would not know about until 40 minutes later was that Dr. Harrison Cole had already made 2 phone calls. The first was to his attorney. The second was to the chief of medicine, Dr. Wallace Pruitt, whose office was on the 4th floor and whose response to being called before 8 in the morning was never charitable. Maya was still with the transport team monitoring Daniel's post-CT readout in the hallway outside radiology when Lydia Parsons found her. The charge nurse walked with the particular purposefulness of someone carrying information they wish they didn't have. Pruitt wants to see you, Lydia said. Now. Maya looked at the readout in her hand. The patient. Priya's got him. She'll call you if anything changes. Lydia paused. Maya, Pruitt's not alone. That was the part that mattered. Not the summons were manageable. They were formal processes. They had procedures and protocols, and Maya had navigated formal processes in environments far more hostile than a hospital administrator's office. but not alone meant something specific. Who's with him? Maya asked. Hospital legal, Lydia said. And Cole. Maya handed the readout to Lydia. She straightened her badge. She walked toward the elevator. The fourth floor of St. Mercy's was quieter than the trauma wing, in a way that always felt slightly artificial to Maya. The carpeted hallway, the framed photographs of past apartment chairs on the wall, the reception desk where a woman named Gail had worked for 16 years, and who looked up when Maya stepped off the elevator with an expression of the particular sympathy that belongs to people who have seen this walk before. He's ready for you, Gail said. Maya nodded and pushed open the office door. Dr. Wallace Pruitt was 61 compact, with the kind of posture that belonged to former military or former athletes, though he was neither. He had built his authority through 40 years of institutional loyalty, and the office around him reflected that organized formal, designed to convey permanence and gravity. He sat behind his desk with his hands folded and his face arranged in the expression of a man who has already decided several things and is now waiting to see how the person in front of him will respond to those decisions. Cole was in the chair to the left. He did not look at Maya when she entered. He looked at a point slightly above the window, the precise geography of a man who is engaged in the business of being aggrieved. The hospital's legal representative, a woman named Sandra Fielding, who Maya had never met, sat in the chair on the right with a legal pad and a pen and the careful blankness of someone whose job requires them to be present without appearing to be interested. Sit down, Ms. Carter, Pruitt said. I'll stand, Maya said, not as a challenge, as a statement of where she was. Pruitt looked at her for a moment. Then he accepted it with the smallest of nods, the unconscious acknowledgement of a man registering, without wanting to, that the woman in front of him is not here to be managed easily. Dr. Cole has brought a formal concern to my attention regarding an incident in Trauma Bay 3 this morning, Pruitt began. His language was institutional, precise, buffered, the vocabulary of liability and protocol. Specifically, an unauthorized medical intervention performed by a nursing staff member during an active surgical procedure. I performed an emergency needle decompression on the patient's left chest wall, Maya said, flat, factual. At the time I performed it, the patient's oxygen saturation was at 69% and falling. Blood pressure was compromised beyond what the right-side intervention had addressed. I identified a simultaneous left-sided tension pneumothorax based on clinical presentation, including tracheal deviation and distended neck veins. You performed a procedure outside your authorized scope, Cole said. He had turned to look at her now. His voice was the voice he used when he wanted to end arguments. I performed a procedure that preserved the patient's life, Maya said. That, the Cole said, is not for you to determine. In that moment, Maya said it was. The room went quiet in a way that had texture to it. Sandra Fielding wrote something on her legal pad. Pruitt looked between the two of them with the expression of a man watching a chess game where both players have already decided not to follow conventional rules. Then Pruitt said carefully, Ms. Carter, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to understand that your answer matters significantly to how this proceeds. He paused. Do you have any formal training beyond your nursing licensure that would bear on the intervention you performed this morning? The question landed in the room and hung there. Maya looked at Pruitt, then at Cole, then back at Pruitt. She had known this question was coming. Not because she had planned for it, but because she had been in enough rooms like this under different names at different tables in different countries to know that the moment always arrives when someone asks you to explain yourself, and the answer you give is the answer that changes everything. She took a breath and she answered. Yes, she said, I do. And that single word was the stone that started the avalanche. The word yes settled into that office and did not dissipate. It pressed against the walls the way sound presses against glass, looking for a way out, finding none reverberating instead. Wallace Pruitt unfolded his hands and refolded them. Sandra Fielding stopped writing. Harrison Cole, for the first time since Maya had walked through that door, looked at her with something other than controlled antagonism. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has just realized the map he has been using for navigation was missing an entire country. Expand on that, Pruitt said. His voice had changed, register still formal, but underneath the formality, something had opened. A door, slightly ajar. Maya stood exactly where she was. She had not moved since entering the room, and she did not move now. Before nursing, she said, I served 8 years in the United States Army. Combat medic. I was attached to special operations units for the final 4 years of my service. I deployed to Afghanistan twice and Iraq once. Field trauma was my primary function. The silence that followed was different from the silences that had preceded it. This one had weight to it, substance. Cole said nothing, but something was happening behind his eyes, the rapid internal recalibration of a man whose entire framework for understanding the person in front of him had just been structurally altered. He had filed a complaint against a nurse. He was now sitting in a room with a combat-trained field medic who had performed emergency procedures under active fire in conditions that made a trauma bay look like a controlled classroom exercise. "You have documentation," Sandra Fielding said. It was the first time she had spoken, and her voice was careful, the voice of someone whose job is to locate facts before feelings. "My D-214 is on file with Human Resources," Maya said. "My field medic certification, my advanced trauma life support credentials, and my combat casualty care qualifications are all documented. I disclosed all of it during my hiring process 3 years ago." Pruitt looked at Sandra. Something passed between them. Not words, but the compressed communication of two people who have just recognized that the institutional ground beneath a situation has shifted. "They're in her file," Sandra said quietly. She had already pulled up something on the tablet in her lap. Her voice was flat in the way that voices go flat when people are working very hard not to let something show. "All of it. Army service, MOS classification, special operations, attachment field, trauma certifications. It's all there." Cole turned his head slowly towards Sandra Fielding. "It's in her personnel file." "Yes, Sandra said. "And no one," Cole stopped. His jaw worked. "No one flagged this when she was assigned to trauma." "She was hired as a trauma nurse," Sandra said carefully. "Her background exceeded the position requirements. It was noted. It was filed. It wasn't—" She paused, and in the pause lived the particular awkward truth of institutional oversight failures. "It wasn't communicated to the department's senior surgical staff." Cole looked at Pruitt. Pruitt looked at his desk, and Maya Carter stood in the center of that office and watched a hospital begin to reckon with itself. "The complaint," Pruitt said finally. He addressed Cole, not Maya. His voice had the careful quality of a man choosing his next words the way you choose your footing on uncertain ground. "Harrison, I need to understand what you want to proceed with here." Cole was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but a very full container being very carefully managed. "What I want," he said, and his voice was slower now, more deliberate, stripped of the courtroom's certainty that had characterized every word he'd spoken since entering that bay at 5 a.m, "is for this hospital to function with clarity, with clear lines of authority, with protocols that exist for reasons. Those protocols exist to protect patients," Maya said. She said it without accusation. Just fact delivered the way a scalpel is delivered, precise, clean, no excess. "Yes," Cole said, "they do." "This morning," Maya said, "following the protocol as it was being applied would have killed Daniel Reeves." Another silence, longer this time. "You don't know that," Cole said, but the certainty was different now. It had texture to it. Doubt does that. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just changes the way certainty sounds. "The CT confirmed bilateral presentation," Maya said. "Left-sided tension pneumothorax developing simultaneously with the right. The timeline in the chart, if anyone reviews it, shows a saturation drop inconsistent with the right side presentation alone. I spoke 3 times before I acted. I acted when I did because the patient had no time left." Pruitt was looking at her now with the expression of a man performing very rapid arithmetic on a problem he had not anticipated walking into his office that morning. "3 times, he said. "You raised the concern 3 times before intervening." "Yes. And each time you were dismissed. The 3rd time I was ordered out of the bay." Pruitt turned to Cole. Cole said nothing, and his silence was its own kind of answer. "I'll need the incident report," Pruitt said to Sandra Fielding. His voice had assumed the quality of institutional management, not warm, not cold, but purposeful in the way that people are purposeful when they are trying to get ahead of something before it becomes something larger. "I'll need it today. I'll need the chart. I'll need the CT findings. And I'll need to speak with every person who was in that trauma bay this morning." Sandra was already writing. Cole stood up. He stood with the particular stiffness of a man who is accustomed to leaving rooms on his own terms and is currently discovering that this is not one of those rooms. He straightened his coat. He looked at Pruitt. He did not look at Maya. "I'll be in my office," he said. He walked to the door. He opened it, And then with one hand on the frame, he stopped. He didn't turn around fully, just enough so that his profile was visible to the room. The jaw, the set of the eyes, the angle of a man caught between the version of himself he has always presented to the world and the version that is trying to surface in this moment against his will. The patient, he said, is he stable? 92% saturation the last time I checked, Maya said. BP climbing. He's responding well. Cole nodded, just once. Small. Then he walked out. The door clicked and shut behind him, and the room exhaled. Pruitt looked at Maya for a long moment. Then he said something that she had not expected, which was almost nothing. Just thank you, Ms. Carter. I'll be in touch before end of day. Maya nodded. She left. She was back on the trauma floor by 8:47 in the morning. Darnell was waiting for her near the nurse's station with 2 cups of coffee, which was either coincidence or intelligence gathering. And with Darnell, it was always the latter. He handed her a cup without preamble and fell into step beside her without being asked, which was one of the things she valued most about him. He understood when to be present and when to be quiet, and he was almost never wrong about which one was needed. 4th floor called down looking for your personnel file, he said low and even. I know, she said. Priya Anand has been asking about you. Where is she? Post-CT consult room. She's been watching the patient like a hawk. Kid hasn't left his side in 40 minutes. He paused. She told the surgical resident on call that any decision about next steps goes through the nurse who identified the bilateral presentation. Use those exact words. Maya stopped walking. She turned and looked at Darnell. He shrugged, but his eyes were not shrugging. His eyes were doing what they always did, seeing everything and filing it away with the precision of a man who understood that in a hospital, information was as vital as oxygen. She's 28 years old and she's already figured out something. It takes most people in this building a decade to learn, he said. What's that? Maya asked. That being right in the room is worth more than being safe in the hallway. Maya held his gaze for a moment, then she kept walking. Priya Anand was standing outside the post-CT consult room when Maya came around the corner, and the young resident straightened in a way that wasn't quite military and wasn't quite formal. It was the body language of someone who respects a thing they don't yet fully have words for. She had dark eyes that were currently running on insufficient sleep and excess adrenaline, and her hair had escaped its ponytail at some point in the last 3 hours, in the way that emergency medicine always dismantles carefully prepared appearances. He's stable, Priya said immediately. Bilateral decompression is holding. The left side shows residual air, but the pressure is equalized. The attending on call wanted us to discuss a surgical plan, but I told him we need to wait for the formal review of the CT. Who's the attending? Dr. Nguyen. He came on at 7. A brief pause. He was very interested in the chart notes from the bay. Interested how, Priya looked at her steadily. He said, and I'm quoting exactly that, the clinical notation from the initial intervention was the most precise field assessment documentation he had seen from a nursing staff member in 20 years of emergency medicine. She paused. He also asked me who wrote it. Maya said nothing. I told him, Priya said. He'd like to speak with you. Maya nodded once and pushed open the consult room door. Dr. Michael Nguyen was 53, lean, with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been in emergency medicine long enough to have developed a profound allergy to wasted motion and performed drama. He was reviewing the CT images when Maya entered, and he looked up from the screen with the direct, unornamented attention of someone who looks at you because they are actually trying to see you. Ms. Carter, he said, sit down. She sat. She had not sat in Pruitt's office. Here she sat because Nguyen's invitation was a different kind, not the sitting of a person being managed, but the sitting of a person being consulted. Walk me through the bilateral assessment, he said, from the beginning, before the paramedics arrived. She walked him through it. He listened the way experienced clinicians listen without interruption, without the subtle signals that indicate someone is waiting for their turn to speak, rather than actually processing what is being said. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise, each one revealing that his understanding of what had happened in Bay 3 was already substantially accurate, and he was using her account to confirm rather than inform. When she finished, he leaned back slightly. You've seen this before, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said, in the field. Twice, she said, both times in situations where standard protocol sequencing wasn't viable. Both times bilateral presentations that develop simultaneously rather than in sequence. It's rare. It tends to get missed because the initial presentation on one side is so acute that it dominates the clinical picture. It tends to get missed, Nguyen said quietly, because it's rare enough that most physicians have never seen it in the field. In combat medics, he paused, and something in his face was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Combat medics see things we don't. Maya held his gaze. Some things. I'm going to recommend a full review of this morning's incident, Nguyen said. Not a disciplinary review, a clinical review. I want this case in front of the trauma committee. I want it documented and published in the department's case record. The intervention you performed this morning needs to be understood as clinical precedent, not as an act of insubordination. Maya was quiet for a moment, not because she was surprised exactly, but because she was taking the measure of the moment, feeling its weight. Cole has filed a complaint, she said. I'm aware, Nguyen said. That won't, Mr. Carter. His voice was gentle but absolute. Harrison Cole is an exceptional surgeon. He is also a man who made a critical assessment error under pressure this morning and then attempted to remove from the room the person who identified that error. Those two facts are both true, and the institution is going to have to hold both of them at the same time. That's not simple, but it's necessary. She looked at him. And the complaint? Complaints, Nguyen said, tend to become complicated when the person being complained about just saved the life that was on the table. He stood, extended his hand. Thank you for what you did this morning. She shook it. She walked back out to the floor. It was 9:22 in the morning, and the hospital was in full operation around her nurses charting residents, consulting techs, moving between departments, the whole vast organism of a hospital doing what it does, continuous and self-replenishing, and apparently indifferent to the earthquake that had occurred inside one trauma bay before most of its staff had finished their first cup of coffee. But Maya could feel it, the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before it's visible, in the glances that lasted a half-second longer than usual, in the way conversations in the nurses' station stopped and resumed with slightly different energy when she passed, in the way Priya Anand had planted herself outside a patient room and used language the nurse who identified the bilateral presentation that was a flag planted in institutional soil. Something had cracked open. She just didn't know yet how wide the crack would go. She was doing a routine post-procedure check on Daniel Reeves at 9:41 when his wife arrived. Caroline Reeves was 37, still in the clothes she had clearly pulled on in the dark in the first stunned minutes after the phone call, her hair unbrushed and her eyes carrying the particular devastation of a person who has spent the last several hours not knowing whether the person they love is alive or dead. She was accompanied by a hospital social worker, and she gripped a paper coffee cup from the vending machine in the lobby, the way people grip things when their hands need something to do because everything else is out of their control. The social worker brought her to the doorway and then stopped because Caroline Reeves had seen Daniel. His chest rising and falling, the monitors steady the numbers where they needed to be, and the sight of him breathing had done something to her that rendered her momentarily unable to move or speak. Maya stepped back from the bedside to give her room. Carolyn moved to the edge of the bed. She put her hand over her husband's hand. She didn't say anything. She just stood there with her hand over his and let herself breathe. After a long moment, she looked up. Her eyes found Maya, who was standing near the monitor console, quiet, present, not intruding. Were you with him? Caroline asked. Her voice was rough. When they brought him in? Yes, Maya said. Is he going to be okay? Maya looked at her with the directness of someone who understands that in these moments, the kindest thing you can offer is truth delivered with care. He's stable, she said. His body's responding well. The doctors will talk to you about the road ahead, but right now what matters is that he's here, he's breathing, and he fought hard. Carolyn Reeves looked at her for a long moment, and then she said softly, "Did you fight for him?" The room was very still. Maya held the woman's gaze. "Yes," she said, "I did." Carolyn closed her eyes. One tear moved down her cheek, just one. And then she turned back to her husband and held his hand with both of hers, and Maya stepped out of the room quietly, the way she had walked into the hospital that morning, without fanfare, without announcement, without asking anyone to notice. But the difference was that now the hospital did. And in the administrative wing, on the 4th floor where Dr. Wallace Pruitt was on the phone with the hospital's board liaison, and Sandra Fielding was pulling personnel files and cross-referencing incident reports, the machinery of institutional reckoning had begun to turn. Slowly, with the particular weight of bureaucracy in motion, but it was turning. And one floor below in his office, with the commendations on the wall and the door closed, Dr. Harrison Cole was sitting very still and staring at the CT images from Daniel Reeves's chest, both sides bilateral exactly as she had said, and understanding with the slow, unwilling arrival of genuine comprehension what had happened in that bay, what he had missed, what she had seen, and what the distance between those two things was going to cost him. The formal complaint landed in Sandra Fielding's inbox at 10:15 in the morning, and by 10:30 it had been printed, reviewed, and placed in a manila folder with the kind of quiet efficiency that legal departments deploy when they sense that a document is going to have a long and complicated life. Maya didn't see the complaint. She didn't need to. She had known it was coming the way you know a storm is coming when you can feel the pressure change, not because anyone tells you, but because you have spent enough time in open country to read the sky on your own. What she hadn't anticipated was the speed. By 11 o'clock, her charge nurse credentials had been flagged for administrative review. Not suspended. Flagged. Which in hospital language meant we are not acting yet, but we are positioning ourselves to act, and we want you to know that we are watching. It was a bureaucratic move, subtle and deniable, and the person who had authorized it was not Harrison Cole, whose complaint was still technically under preliminary review. It was someone above Cole, someone who had received a phone call that morning from a name that Lydia Parsons would later describe to Maya only as someone on the board who plays golf with Cole every other Saturday. Lydia told Maya this at 11:14 in the medication room, with the door closed and her voice at a register just above a whisper. "They flagged your credentials," Lydia said. Maya was counting saline bags. She didn't stop counting. "I know. You know. Darnell told me at 10:45. Lydia looked at her with the expression of someone who has worked alongside a person for 3 years and is only now beginning to understand that they have been seeing only the surface of something that goes considerably deeper. "Maya, they're trying to get ahead of this. If they can establish cause for a credential review before the clinical committee convenes, they can reframe the conversation. Instead of asking why a surgeon missed a bilateral presentation, they start asking whether you had the authority to intervene. They change the question." "I know how it works," Maya said quietly. "Do you have a lawyer?" Maya set down the last saline bag. She turned and looked at Lydia with the direct, unhurried attention that was one of the most consistent things about her. The sense that she was always the least panicked person in any given room, not because she was unaware of the stakes, but because she had developed through circumstance and necessity a relationship with high stakes that most people never achieve. "I have someone I can call," she said. "Call them," Lydia said. "Today, before end of shift." Maya nodded. She picked up her clipboard and walked out of the medication room, and as she walked, she was doing the arithmetic of her situation with the cool, rapid precision she brought to every problem. The complaint was filed, her credentials were flagged. The board had been engaged before the clinical review had even formally begun. These were not coincidences, they were moves in a sequence, and the sequence had a logic to it, and the logic told her that the people who wanted this story to go away had already decided on their preferred outcome and were working backward from it. What they had not yet accounted for was Daniel Reeves, or more specifically, what Daniel Reeves' chart said. At 11:32, Dr. Michael Nguyen sent an email to the trauma committee chair, the chief medical officer, and the hospital's patient safety officer. Maya would not see this email for another 3 hours, but its contents would become the second stone in what was building toward an avalanche. In the email, Nguyen formally requested an emergency clinical review of the morning's incident, characterized the intervention as demonstrably life-preserving, based on post-procedure imaging and patient stability metrics, and attached the CT findings, the timeline of saturation readings, in the piece that landed hardest, a 3-paragraph clinical notation that Maya had written in the chart during transport. Precise, dated, time-stamped, describing in the clear, unadorned language of someone trained to document under pressure exactly what she had observed when she had observed it and what she had communicated to the attending surgeon before acting. 3 times, documented, time-stamped. The paper trail was its own kind of testimony. Darnell found her at 12:07 near the trauma bay intake desk and handed her a piece of paper folded in thirds. He did it the way you hand something to someone when you want plausible deniability about having handed it smoothly, without eye contact, without breaking stride. She unfolded it when she was alone. It was a printout of a text message thread. She didn't recognize the number at the top. She read the exchange twice. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket, and the expression on her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes went very still and very cold, in the way that things go still and cold when you have just been handed confirmation of something you had suspected but hoped wasn't true. She found Darnell at the supply station 4 minutes later. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Her voice was low and level. Darnell kept his eyes on the inventory sheet in front of him. Anonymous, he said. Darnell, I'm serious. Someone left it at the station in a blank envelope with your name on it. I don't know who. I didn't see who. He paused. But whoever it was wanted you to have it, and you needed to have it. She looked at the folded paper in her hand. The text thread was between two people identified only by their phone numbers, but the content was specific enough that the identities were not difficult to infer. The messages sent between 6:45 and 7:20 that morning discussed the incident in Bay 3, discussed Maya by name, used the words liability exposure and the word that had gone cold in her chest, controllable. The word controllable. As in the situation is controllable if we move quickly enough. As in she is controllable if we move quickly enough. Maya put the paper back in her pocket. She took a breath. And then she did something that surprised even Darnell, who had watched her be unsurprisable for 3 years. She picked up her phone and made a call. Right there, in the middle of the supply station. Not in the break room, not in the stairwell, not in a corner somewhere private and strategic. Right there in plain sight where anyone walking past could see that Maya Carter was making a call and was not hiding the fact that she was making it. The call lasted 45 seconds. When she hung up, she looked at Darnell. She'll be here by 2, Maya said. Who? Darnell said. My lawyer, Maya said. And she walked away. His name, Darnell would think about this later. Replaying the moment with the particular attention we give to moments we recognize as pivotal was not his. Her lawyer's name was Rebecca Okafor, and she was 44 years old, a former JAG officer who had spent 8 years in the Army before going into private practice, and who had represented veterans in employment and civil rights cases for 11 years. She and Maya had met in a way that neither of them talked about in detail during a period of Maya's transition out of the military that had involved circumstances that were not simple and a process that had required a legal advocate who understood both the military and civilian systems from the inside. Rebecca Okafor arrived at St. Mercy's at 1:58. She walked in the way that a certain kind of legal professional walks into institutions they have entered many times in an adversarial capacity, unhurried, unintimidated, already reading the room before the room has registered her presence. She was in a charcoal suit with a briefcase that was functional rather than decorative, and she found Maya at the third-floor nurses' station without asking anyone for directions, which meant she had done her reconnaissance before arriving. Talk to me, Rebecca said. They found an empty consultation room, one of the small neutral spaces hospitals keep for difficult conversations, and Maya laid it out. All of it, from the moment she arrived that morning, to the text thread in her pocket, to the credential flag that had appeared in the system 3 hours ago. She spoke without editorializing, without self-pity, and without omitting anything, which was what Rebecca had always valued most about working with her. Maya Carter did not shade her own account. She gave you what happened. You built from that. Rebecca listened without interrupting. She took 3 notes on a yellow legal pad. When Maya finished, Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and then she said, the text thread. Maya put it on the table. Rebecca read it. Twice. Her face during the reading was completely professional, blank in the way that experienced lawyers go blank when they are managing their reaction, because their reaction unmanaged would be useful information to anyone watching. When she finished, she set it down with the care of someone handling something they recognize as significant. This, Rebecca said, is not about you performing an unauthorized procedure. No, Maya agreed, it isn't. This is about a senior surgeon making a diagnostic error that would have killed a patient and the institution moving to protect him before the facts are on the record. Yes, and they use the credential flag as a prophylactic measure to cast doubt on your qualifications before the clinical review establishes that your intervention was correct. Rebecca's voice was even, but underneath it, Maya could hear what 3 years of working together had taught her to hear: a controlled professional anger, the kind that doesn't run hot, but burns steady and a very long time. They are trying to change the story before the story gets told. Can they? Maya asked. Rebecca looked at her. Not if we move faster than they do. She picked up her pen. I'm filing an emergency motion to preserve all electronic communications related to this incident today, before 5 o'clock. I'm also contacting the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation to flag this credential review as potentially retaliatory, which means any action taken on it will be subject to external scrutiny. She paused. And I'm going to request a formal deposition from every person who was in that trauma bay this morning. Cole's going to push back. Cole's attorney is going to push back, Rebecca corrected. Cole himself and I want you to think about this carefully because I've read enough of these cases to know Cole himself is currently sitting somewhere in this building doing the thing that men in his position do when they have made an error in a room full of witnesses. He's calculating. He's measuring the distance between what he did and what can be proven. And the one thing that is working against him in that calculation, the thing he cannot make go away, is that Daniel Reeves is alive. And Daniel Reeves is alive because of what you did. And that fact is in the chart, in the CT images, and in the clinical record time-stamped and documented and about as movable as a mountain. Maya was quiet for a moment. Outside the consultation room, the hospital moved voices, footsteps, the distant register of a monitor alarm quickly silenced. The ordinary pulse of a place where lives were constantly being fought for and occasionally lost, and where the people who did that fighting sometimes needed someone to fight for them. There's something else, Maya said. Rebecca looked at her. Priya Anand, Maya said, second-year resident. She was in the Bay the entire time. She has been, Maya paused, choosing the word present, in a way that I think matters, meaning she's willing to speak, meaning she already has been. She told the surgical resident on call that any decisions about Daniel Reeves go through the nurse who identified the bilateral presentation. She said that in earshot of 3 other staff members. Rebecca wrote the name down. I want to talk to her. She'll talk to you, Maya said. She's young enough to still believe that what's right and what's done should be the same thing. So do you, Rebecca said. Maya looked at her. I used to believe it automatically, she said. Now I believe it deliberately. There's a difference. Rebecca studied her for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has represented this woman in difficult rooms before and has come to understand that she tends to say the most important things in the quietest voice. You holding up? She asked, not as a legal professional, as a person. I'm fine, Maya said. And the thing about Maya Carter was that when she said she was fine, it was almost never the thing people say when they are not fine and don't want to talk about it. It was a report, an accurate assessment. She had been in places where fine was genuinely relative, and she had learned to locate her actual coordinates on that spectrum with precision. Okay, Rebecca said. She closed her legal pad. I need to make 4 calls. You need to go back to your floor, do your job, and let me do mine. Don't discuss this with anyone except Lydia Parsons and tell her the same thing. Nothing. To anyone. Until I say. Understood, Maya said. She stood up. She was at the door when Rebecca spoke again. Maya. A beat. What you did this morning, the procedure, were you scared? Maya stopped. She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved because Rebecca was not asking out of sentiment. She was asking because she had learned that the answer to that question in the right room at the right time was the kind of thing that changed how people understood everything else. No, Maya said. I wasn't scared. She paused. There was no room for it. There never is in those moments. You do what you know how to do, and you trust that knowing how to do it means you were supposed to be there. Rebecca looked at her for a long moment. That's exactly what you're going to say when they ask you, she said. Maya nodded once. She walked out. She was back on the trauma floor at 2:23, and the afternoon had taken on the particular quality of a day in which too much has already happened, and the body is running on the particular fuel of adrenaline and purpose that keeps certain people upright long past the point where comfort fails them. She checked her patients. She consulted with Priya on Daniel Reeves' afternoon vitals, which were continuing to improve in the steady incremental way that means a body is genuinely recovering, rather than performing recovery. She charted with the same meticulous precision she had applied since her first day on the floor because she understood now more than ever that the chart was not paperwork. The chart was evidence. At 3:15, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. It said, only conference room B, 4th floor, 4 o'clock, come alone. HC, she stared at those initials for exactly 3 seconds. Then she forwarded the message to Rebecca Okafor and kept walking. Harrison Cole wanted a private meeting, and Maya Carter, who had spent 8 years learning that private meetings requested by powerful men in institutional settings were almost never private, and almost never meetings, was already thinking 3 moves ahead of whatever he thought he was about to say. Rebecca Okafor's response to Maya's forwarded text arrived in 40 seconds flat. Do not go. I mean it. Not alone. Not at all. Not without me present. If he wants to talk, it goes through me. Forward. Anything else he sends? Maya read it twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket and stood in the corridor outside the trauma bay and made a decision that Rebecca was not going to like. She went. Not because she was reckless. Maya Carter had never been reckless. Not in the army, not in the field, not in any of the rooms she had walked into over the course of a life that had required her to walk into a great many rooms that other people would have found reasons to avoid. She went because she had learned something in 8 years of operating in environments where information was the difference between survival and its opposite. You learn more in the room than outside it. You learn what a person actually wants when you sit across from them and watch their face while they try to get it. And she needed to know what Harrison Cole actually wanted, not what his lawyer wanted, not what the board wanted, not what the institutional machinery had been set in motion to produce. What he wanted, the man himself, because the shape of what he wanted would tell her everything about what was coming next. She texted Rebecca as she walked, going in. "We'll record everything. Do not call during. Trust me." Rebecca's response was a single word: impossible. And then after a pause of about 15 seconds that Maya imagined contained a great deal of controlled professional frustration, "Fine. Call me the moment you're out." Conference room B on the 4th floor was the smaller of the 2 administrative meeting rooms, not Pruitt's territory, not the legal department's territory. A neutral space. The choice of location was itself a communication, and Maya had already read it before she opened the door. Cole was alone. He was standing near the window with his hands in his coat pockets, and he turned when she came in with the particular alertness of a man who has been waiting and is aware of exactly how long he has been waiting, and has spent that time in the kind of interior preparation that a certain kind of person does when they are about to have a conversation they cannot entirely control. He looked different than he had in the trauma bay. Not smaller exactly, but differently constructed. The authority was still there. It was structural, built into how he held his shoulders, how he occupied space, but something in the architecture had shifted. Like a building that is still standing but has sustained damage that changes how you look at it. He did not offer his hand. She did not expect him to. "You came alone," he said. "You asked me to," she said. "Your lawyer told you not to." "Yes." He studied her for a moment. "Why did you come anyway?" "Because I wanted to hear what you have to say without a legal filter on either side of it," Maya said. "And because I think you asked me here for the same reason." Something moved through his expression, not quite surprise, more like the recognition of someone who has anticipated being understood and is still, despite that anticipation, slightly unprepared for the actuality of it. "Sit down," he said. They both sat. Cole was quiet for a moment. He had his hands flat on the table in front of him, not folded, not fidgeting, just flat as if he needed to feel solid ground beneath him. Maya watched him the way she always watched people in important moments, fully, without performing the act of watching. "I've been a surgeon for 26 years, he said. His voice was different than it had been in the trauma bay. Still controlled, but the control was serving a different purpose now. Not authority, but precision. The effort of a man trying to say something accurately. In 26 years, I have not..." He stopped. Started again. "I have had difficult cases. I have had cases that went wrong. I have had patients I could not save despite everything I had. Those things are part of this work, and I have made my peace with all of them." A pause. "What happened this morning is different." Maya said nothing. She gave him the space to continue because interrupting this particular moment would have been like stepping on something that was trying to grow. "The bilateral presentation," Cole said. "I didn't see it." He said it flat. No cushioning, no qualifier, no institutional language to soften the edges. "I was treating the acute right-sided presentation with everything I had, and I did not see what was developing on the left. And when you told me," he stopped again. His jaw moved. "When you told me, I heard it as interference, as a nurse overstepping, and I shut you down." "3 times, Maya said. 3 times, he confirmed. The room was very quiet. "I want to understand something," Cole said. He looked at her directly, and whatever else had changed about him in the hours since the morning, the intelligence in his eyes had not. It was the same sharp, comprehensive attention she had clocked when he walked into the bay before dawn. "When you performed the decompression, what was in your mind or sweet mind?" It was not the question she had expected. She had expected justification or negotiation, or some version of a request that she walk back elements of what had happened in exchange for the complaint being softened or withdrawn. This was not that. This was something else. This was a surgeon asking a clinician to account for a decision with the genuine curiosity of someone who needed to understand it. Not much, she said honestly. In those moments, there isn't a lot of interior narration. You've trained for it. Your hands know what to do. You watch the body, you read what it's telling you, and you act. She paused. The last thing in my mind, if there was a last thing, was the first bilateral presentation I saw in the field. A sergeant in Kandahar province. Roadside device. Two-vehicle collision. We were 40 minutes from the nearest surgical unit. She looked at Cole steadily. That day there was no one to tell, no surgeon to defer to, no protocol chain. There was the sergeant and what I knew and what I had in my kit, so I did it. A beat. He walked out of that country on his own 2 feet. That's the last thing I thought about. And then I stopped thinking, and I did what I knew how to do. Cole was very still. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had heard it all day. How many times have you done it, the full decompression, in the field? 7, Maya said. 7. The number landed on the table between them, and neither of them moved. 7, Cole repeated. 3 conventional, 4 emergency. Different conditions each time. Different patients. All survivals. Cole looked at his hands on the table. Something was happening in his face, a slow, deep reconfiguration of something that had been structured a very particular way for a very long time. It was not comfortable to watch, but it was real. And Maya had learned to value real things even when they were difficult, because real things were the only materials from which anything lasting could be built. I'm going to withdraw the complaint, Cole said. Maya didn't react externally. Internally, a single clean thread of something moved through her, not relief exactly. More like the click of a thing settling into alignment. I'm going to withdraw it, Cole said again, as if saying it twice made it more real. And I am going to appear before the clinical review and give a full account of this morning's incident, including my errors. He paused. Including all 3 times I dismissed what you were telling me. That's going to be difficult, Maya said. Not as a warning, as an acknowledgement. Yes, he said, it is. Another pause. It should be. She looked at him. Why are you telling me this instead of your lawyer? Cole was quiet for a moment, then, because he told me the smart thing to do was to let the credential review run, let it complicate your record and settle the clinical review with as little visibility as possible. Make it a contained incident. Protect the institution. He met her eyes. And I have spent the last 4 hours sitting with the image of that CT, both sides, exactly as you said. And I decided I am not going to be the kind of surgeon who lets the smart thing and the right thing exist in different rooms. Maya held his gaze for a long moment. 20 years of reading people in fields and hospitals and offices and every kind of room that mattered told her that what she was seeing was real. Not strategy, not calculation. The genuinely uncomfortable, genuinely costly arrival of a man at a version of himself he had not previously been willing to inhabit. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay, he nodded, he stood, she stood, and they walked out of conference room B separately. Him first, her a few minutes later, and the space between their exits was the only privacy either of them had left to offer the moment. She called Rebecca from the stairwell. Rebecca listened to the full account without interrupting, which itself was a measure of how significant the information was, because Rebecca Okafor was not by nature a non-interrupter. When Maya finished, the silence on the line lasted approximately 4 seconds. He's withdrawing the complaint, Rebecca said. Yes. Voluntarily. And appearing before a clinical review. Yes. Maya. A pause. That changes things considerably. I know. The credential flag becomes untenable if the complaint is withdrawn. They have no standing to continue a review on a complaint that no longer exists. Another pause during which Maya could practically hear Rebecca's legal mind realigning at speed. I'm still filing the preservation motion, and I'm still talking to Priya Anand, but the shape of this, it's different now. Yes, Maya said, it is. She hung up. She stood in the stairwell for exactly 60 seconds, which was her equivalent of what other people might call a moment to herself, and then she pushed through the door and went back to work. The clinical review convened at 9 in the morning 3 days later in the main conference room on the 4th floor, and it lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. Maya sat at one side of the table with Rebecca Okafor beside her. Cole sat at the other side with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision that has cost him something and has decided to bear that cost without flinching. Pruitt chaired. The committee included Nguyen, 2 other senior physicians, the patient safety officer, and a nursing department representative. Cole spoke for 40 minutes. He described the morning with the same clinical precision he brought to surgical procedures, detailed, accurate, and without the protective softening that would have been both understandable and professionally advisable. He described each of the 3 times Maya had raised the concern. He described his response to each of them. He described with a particular steadiness that the room recognized as something earned, rather than performed the moment when the monitors alarmed and he looked across the table at a woman he had just ordered out of his bay and asked her what she was seeing. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Nguyen was the first to speak. The patient's current status, day 3 post-intervention, Priya Anand said from her seat near the door, where she had been invited to attend as a clinical witness. Bilateral resolution confirmed on follow-up imaging. Expected discharge in 48 to 72 hours. She paused. He asked to know the name of the nurse who was with him. We told him. Another silence. Pruitt looked at Maya. Ms. Carter, do you have anything to add to Dr. Cole's account? Maya looked at the table, then at Pruitt. It's accurate, she said. That was all. The review committee deliberated for an hour and 15 minutes. The committee's finding, when it was delivered in writing to all parties the following morning, was unambiguous. The intervention performed by Maya Carter on the morning in question was clinically warranted, demonstrably life-preserving, and consistent with her documented training and qualifications. The credential flag was lifted. The formal complaint was noted as withdrawn and the file closed. Cole was required to complete a mandatory peer consultation program focused on interdisciplinary communication, not punitive, but required. And a new standing policy was entered into the hospital's emergency trauma protocol. Any clinical concern raised by a nursing staff member during a trauma procedure must be formally acknowledged by the attending surgeon before the procedure continues with a documented reason if the concern is overruled. One policy, 4 sentences, born from one morning. And it would change in ways that would take years to fully measure how that hospital worked. The morning the findings were released, Maya arrived at 4:47, as she always did. She hung her bag. She tied her hair back. She laced her shoes. She poured coffee, black, no sugar, and stood at the break room window for 90 seconds. Darnell came in and sat down and said nothing, which was its own kind of communication. When she turned, he handed her a copy of the committee's written finding. She already had one. She took it anyway. You know what the wildest part of all this is, Darnell said. Tell me, she said. You've been doing this for 3 years, right here, walking in before anyone else, watching everything, knowing things before other people know them. And the only thing that changed this week is that other people finally ran out of room to look away. Maya looked at the paper in her hand. Then she set it on the counter. That's not the wildest part, she said. What is? She picked up her clipboard. The wildest part is that there are 100 of us, in this hospital alone, people who see things that aren't being seen, who know things that aren't being asked, who've been trained by life, by service, by years of watching to read what other people miss. She looked at him steadily. This week was just the week one of us got caught saving a life in public. Darnell was quiet for a moment, then he said, What happens now? Maya walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame, the same posture, the same threshold, a different version of a moment that had occurred 3 days ago in a conference room on the 4th floor, when a man who had tried to remove her from a room stood in a doorway and asked about the patient he had almost lost. The echo was not lost on her. Now she said, We go back to work. She walked onto the floor. At 9 that morning, Pruitt called her to his office. He was alone this time. No legal representative, no folders arranged with the careful geometry of institutional defensiveness. Just a man behind a desk and a woman standing in front of it, in the particular quiet of 2 people who have arrived by a road neither of them chose at a necessary conversation. I want to offer you something, Pruitt said. I'm listening, Maya said. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. She looked at it without touching it first, because she had learned to assess things before engaging with them. It was a job description, a new position, Director of Trauma Response and Emergency Nursing Excellence, a title that had not existed at St. Mercy's before that morning because the position it described had not been conceived before that morning. It's new, Pruitt said, which was not necessary to say, but which he said anyway, perhaps because he needed to acknowledge the newness of it. We're creating it because of what this week revealed about our protocols, about our communication structures, about what we don't know we're missing. He paused. I want someone who understands both sides of what happened in that bay. Someone who can bridge the gap between what surgeons see and what nurses know. Someone who has, he chose the word carefully, range. Maya picked up the paper. She read it. Then she set it down. If I take this, she said, it doesn't change anything about what happened. It doesn't retroactively make the system work. It doesn't undo the 3 times I was dismissed, or the credential flag, or the text message about making the situation controllable. No, Pruitt said, it doesn't. And the policy change, she said, the new protocol, that happens regardless of whether I take this position. Yes, he said, it's already in implementation. She looked at him. Then I'll take it, she said. Not because it's a reward, because the work needs doing and I know how to do it. Pruitt nodded, and in his nod was something that might, if you were looking carefully, have been the particular relief of a man who has done the right thing slightly later than he should have, but has done it nonetheless. What followed in the weeks and months after that single morning was not a revolution. Revolutions, Maya had learned, were mostly mythology stories told backward to make change seem more sudden and dramatic than it actually was. What actually happened was slower and less cinematic and more durable. Nurses began documenting their clinical observations with a precision they had previously been discouraged from displaying because precision felt like overstepping. Residents began asking questions of nursing staff that they had previously only asked of attending physicians. A second nurse, a pediatric float named James Whitfield, who had spent 6 years prior to nursing, working as an EMT, came forward with a concern during a pediatric cardiac case that was reviewed, taken seriously, and determined to be clinically significant. Cole completed his peer consultation program. He did not become a different man, but he became a more careful one. There is a difference and it matters. He began not immediately, not publicly, but in the particular way that real change happens in people, which is privately and incrementally, and sometimes against their own initial resistance to listen differently in his trauma base. To look at nursing staff the way he had looked at Maya Carter in that moment, after the monitors alarmed with the question he should have been asking all along. And Maya Carter arrived at work at 4:47 in the morning, as she always had. She hung her bag. She tied her hair back. She did the things that she had always done in the order she had always done them. But the hallway she walked was different now. Not because the lights had changed or the walls had moved, because the people in it had. They saw her. Finally, completely and without reservation, they saw her. And for a woman who had spent her entire career standing between silence and survival, being seen was not a small thing. It was everything.